Welcome to the Selling Show, where we unpack, repack, and break down exactly how CEOs, founders, and senior executives sell their ideas, point of view, and personal brand to the people who matter most. This is your host, David Newman, and you are in the right place if you want to build market eminence, amplify your influence, and attract high-value prospects, investors, partners, talent, and media opportunities with less chasing and more confidence. Let's go. All right, my friends, he's back. Five-time, multi-seven-figure business owner, Hall of Fame speaker, tequila guru, New York Times best-selling author of 7 books, Mr. J. Baer. So great to see you.
David, always a pleasure. Great to see you, my friend.
So most people, well, that's not true. What I was going to say is most people that have listened to our show, because you've been on here at least 3-4 times, are familiar with you as the marketing expert, the customer experience expert, the time to win expert, the expert on companies using speed and responsiveness as their competitive advantage. But the truth is, you have an alter ego. This is like a Clark Kent Superman deal right here.
It kind of is. Yeah, I go into the phone booth and I come out drinking.
So a couple years ago, you started this amazing tequila business. Catch us up on how that started and then where the empire is today and what some of the fun incremental steps were along the way.
Well, I've been interested in tequila and agave spirits for 25 to 30 years. I'm from Arizona originally, and so you sort of get exposed to it more so than in Iowa, for example. I went to school in Tucson, right by the border. And when I was in my mid to late 20s, before I had kids, my best friend and I would go to a bar restaurant in Scottsdale every Wednesday for tacos. And we just sit at the bar, and there was a bartender there, his name was Steve, who was really, really into mezcal, like long before it became a thing. And we just thought it was fascinating. We just sit down and be like, okay, church is in session, teach us a new hymn. And he did. And so that sort of began the journey. And so I spent that whole intervening period just as a hobbyist, learning more and studying more. And I'd go to Mexico and visit distilleries and buy and try different ones. And it was just kind of a fun thing that I liked. You know, some people are super into bourbon, and I was just always into tequila. But when I sold my business and stopped recording my podcast, Social Pros, which I'd done for 10 years every week, I'm like, well, I've got a few hours in my schedule that I used to use for the podcast. Maybe it'd be fun to just try and teach people something about tequila, since I've learned a lot over all these years. And David, I had never really done much in the way of short form content. I'd done more longer form podcasts, books, blog posts, webinars, etc. But this idea of short snackable content was certainly something I was aware of as a consultant, but not something I never made very often. I said, well, maybe doing tequila content is also a way to learn more about how Instagram Reels works and TikTok and YouTube Shorts. So that'd be kind of fun. So just on a whim, I made a video, and it was terrible. And I made another video, equally bad, and kind of limped along for a little bit. But then people started like, oh, that's interesting and that's pretty good. And so I started to study it more and get better at it and apply some of the lessons I've learned as a B2B content creator, and brought on my business partner, Maddie, who was a young woman who didn't have a lot of experience. And so it was sort of a Felix and Oscar kind of dynamic, and she's great on camera as well. We get along amazing. And so it started to take off. And then within, 6 months, we were one of the most popular tequila content creators in the world. And that was not expected. It literally was a hobby, and then became more than that. And then we started to get opportunities for sponsorships and joint ventures and e-commerce commissions and things like that. And over the last 18 months, we've pursued a number of different business models. But now, and I don't think you're aware of this, we now have a fully separate division called Slingshot, which is a private consortium of craft tequila brands, almost like a cohort you would have in your business, David. And so we have 17 brands in the cohort, and we help them with marketing, with strategy, with business development, with sales. It's almost like a YPO, EO forum type of an approach, but for tequila brands. So people know us for the videos that we make in social media, which sometimes gets millions of views. But where we're really making money is on the B2B consulting, build out this community side of it, which has been really interesting.
How about that? So I want to take a little detour into that because I think a lot of our listeners are fascinated by this sort of cohort, mastermind, CEO roundtable kind of model. And whether it's in financial services, whether it's in consulting, whether it's in technology, whether it's in tequila, one big obstacle that I think holds a lot of people back from pursuing this is I don't know if competitors would open the kimono and be open and honest and vulnerable with each other in the room. What's been your experience and what were some of your fears in that category early on?
Yeah, that was definitely one of the main challenges that we thought we were going to face because it is a really competitive business. There's more than 2,000 tequila brands right now, which is too many. And at some level, they are all competing for the same share of throat, if you will. But the interesting thing about the tequila business is that some 90% of all tequila in the US is sold by like 8 brands, right? So it's all the ones that you see in the grocery store. It's Patron, Don Julio, Casamigos, Jose Cuervo, obviously, 1800, etc., El Jimador. And then you have like this enormously long tail, right, of small brands that are truly small businesses, right? They're in the low millions of dollars. They have a handful of employees, and they're just trying to fight it out. Now they appeal on quality, on production method, so they have they got a better mousetrap for sure. But it's convincing people that the mousetrap is worth it is the challenge. And what we discovered, David, is that all of these brands, for the most part, are trying to conquer this market where they're at a huge structural disadvantage by themselves. Right, they're trying to keep their own counsel, which is a really hard way to compete against multi-billion-dollar global conglomerates. And so Maddie and I's observation was, well, geez, wouldn't this be better if they could work together? Sort of a 1 + 1 = 3, which is how we came up with the idea. And there is nothing like this in the tequila world. Nothing. There's no chamber of commerce. There's no association. There's nothing. We're the only ones. And so that was the next question, as you said, is, well, will they actually be open and honest? And so we took meetings with a bunch of different brands and we just literally laid it out and said, look, here's what this requires. If you want to be part of this, you have to give as well as get. And that's only going to work if people are generally speaking, forthcoming about the state of their business, et cetera. And we did 20 meetings. 2 of the 20 brands balked at that condition. And so they're not in it. 1 didn't want to pay the price and the other 17 signed on. So surprisingly, it worked out.
And are these meetings virtual? Are they in person? Is it a mix?
Mostly virtual. Occasionally we'll see clients face to face if we happen to be in a city where they are and brand owners are all over the US. And then like any other business, there are industry events where they tend to coagulate. There's one actually on the 1st, just coming up in Florida, which unfortunately I can't go to, but a lot of our clients will be there. So we try and pop into as many of those as possible and see everybody.
So it's really interesting, this whole concept of you have a hobby, you have a passion, you obviously have a day job. On the website. It's like, well, my day job is as a B2B speaker and consultant and researcher, and I write books and I talk to companies. But here's my moonlighting. And what advice would you have for someone who has this passion, whether it's, it could be antique cars, it could be streaming video games, it could be classical music. What lessons have you learned making your passion into a side gig / possibly main gig?
I mean, so many. And you're right. I would say the pro forma for this year is that revenue from speaking, which I've been doing for 17 years, and revenue from tequila will be the same.
Wow, that is amazing.
Which is pretty crazy, right? I will tell you that you're exactly right. If you have a true passion, you can turn it into a business. Like there's no question, right? They always say if you love what you do, you'll never work another day in your life. That's kind of how I feel about this. So it doesn't matter what your vocation is. You can turn it into your occupation if you choose to do so. A couple of things about that, though. One, once you monetize it, some of the joy gets sucked out of it, right? Because now you gotta people are paying you and you have to deliver and you've got deadlines and contracts. And so it's not quite as passionate as it was because now you're partially paying your mortgage based on this, but that's okay. And then the other thing is, and this is the part that I didn't think we were going to be able to do, but we actually have been able to do. And I give a lot of credit to my agent and other folks, is we are successfully marrying the two, because on surface, it doesn't make any sense at all. B2B consultant, strategist, author, tequila content creator, and influencer. But David, it's very common now. I just did one 4 days ago in Cleveland. I go do a keynote on customer experience, followed by a tequila education class and tasting for all the attendees. And so meeting planners now want me to do both because it's cool, it's novel. They're always looking for something to do at the conference. Maybe it's for their employees, maybe it's for their sponsors, maybe it's for their key customers. And the fact that I can do that, they really love it, actually. So there's actually a synergy there that we never expected. So it's hilarious in the real world, though, because every time I give a speech, somebody comes up to me and is like, "You walked out on stage," and I was like, "That's the tequila guy that I follow." Had no idea that I did any business stuff at all.
Yeah.
And then conversely, every once in a while, somebody will DM me on Instagram and be like, "Hey, I didn't know about this whole tequila thing, and I'm reading your book, Talk Triggers, and then a TikTok showed up or whatever about you talking about tequila," and I was like, "What the heck is going on?" So it is definitely a bit of an inception for some people.
Hold on. This one is so good, even I'm taking notes. Listen, are you a CEO, founder, or corporate executive ready to fix your market obscurity problem and gain the market eminence you know you and your company deserve? Cool. Book your private Market Eminence Roadmap call with me, and let's see what might be possible for you. The link is simple. doitmarketing.com/call. See you over there. Now, I got to get back to taking more notes. So I've had this experience. I'm sure many people have had this experience. If we're B2B marketers, consultants, business people, we will use social media, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. You are giving away the keys to the kingdom, the magic sauce that you've discovered after 20 years of hard, painful, insightful work. And it gets like 3 likes and 1 comment. And then I'll say something like, "Hey, cheese, Swiss or cheddar?" 90 comments, 150 likes, 17 shares. It's like, well, wait a second. If I really like cheese, right? But then, it's like, okay, well, now cheese becomes your B2B insights magic gold. You obviously on your and I'm just looking at Instagram, but you have a little bit north of 30K Instagram followers for Baer, B2B Baer. And I think you have around 157,000 followers on Tequila Baer.
Yeah.
What did Tequila Baer have to teach regular Baer about what works on social media to draw attention and authority and followership and recognition?
Yeah, and those lessons are still being imparted. I think part of it is just understanding how short people's attention span really is, especially in this age of AI and bots and everything else. I mean, LinkedIn is nothing but bots now. People responding to comments that they never saw. It's very disheartening. So being even in tequila, right? So our average video used to be about 1:50, and then we got it to 1:30, and now most of them are under a minute, right? And that took 2 years to kind of get that rhythm and be able. And I still find myself like, man, I'd really like to talk about that more, but I guess that's what YouTube's for, right?
Yeah.
So being able to be crisp is definitely part of it. And then frankly, the part that I haven't actually translated, but I should, is just consistency, right? So we have posted 4 or 5 videos a week, every week on Instagram for more than 2.5 years. And I've never missed a week, right? I have never posted with that kind of cadence on the B2B side.
Yeah.
And my agent consistently says, "Hey, if you want to do more speaking gigs, you know, be funny. What if you made as much content about B2B as you make about tequila?" And I said, "Well, Michelle, you're not wrong, but it's sometimes harder to be as crisp with those topics."
Yeah.
But that's part of it, man. I mean, the algorithm rewards participation. No question. And actually, right now, we're right in the middle of a test where we're trying to go from 5 videos a week to 4 videos a week. It's just a little bit easier from a production standpoint, and see if we can backfill enough algorithmic love with stories and comments and other participation to allow us to do 1 fewer a week. But the jury's out. We're not sure yet.
I will tell you that just following your Instagram reels, the conciseness, the tightness is an example that a lot of people should follow. And if I'm looking at it accurately, there's no editing. You'll do a 50-second, 55-second video. Maybe you do a retake or 2 now and again, but it's not like they're concise because they're super chopped up and edited. You record them very concise. Is that right?
It is. We do typically have a cut or 2 just to take out a line or an or a pause, but it's pretty light editing. And that's one of the areas that we've gotten a lot better at, is just knowing in your head what the rhythm is.
Yes.
And being able to deliver that way. Not just myself, but Maddie, who was amazing. I actually write the scripts, right? So I know what we're going to do before we show up. In fact, we're going to shoot today. We shoot 10 videos in a row every 3 weeks.
So you get together in person, batch out 10 videos together.
Yep. And then 3 weeks later, we do 10 more. And if you watch carefully, you can tell when in the sequence we shot it, because you can tell how much we've been drinking, right? So when Maddie's eyes get glassy, you know it's later in the afternoon. But she's incredibly talented and didn't know she had this talent until we put her on camera. But I already know what we're going to say because I figure out what the videos are going to be. I'm the creative director, and then script it. She shows up and I'm like, here, looks at it for 10 seconds, 1 take, done, right? It's really remarkable how good she is at it, thank God. But even things like, they tell you that the hook is so important. All the Instagram consultants and TikTok, consultants, and they're right. The first thing out of your mouth has to be the promise, and writing it that way is very different than the kind of delivery that you and I typically would do for a business audience. Because typically in a business audience, you're going to try and contextualize the problem and talk through the existing scenario. And then you get to, so now what if this were true instead? And here's how you do it, right? So there's a lot more preamble, if you will.
Yeah.
In B2B content. In the consumer side, it's like, bam, you got to parachute right into the middle of the sentence, essentially.
Yeah.
And that it just felt very artificial and kind of bullshit to me. But then once I realized, like, oh, there is a way to do it with authenticity and with professionalism, then we're like, okay, now we got it.
Well, let me ask you this very important question. You're on an airplane speaking to on your way to a keynote speaking engagement. It's a 3.5 hour flight. You're in first class, of course, and they come by. Sir, what may I get you to drink? Number one, do they even have tequila in first class? And what are the typical brands that you find on an airplane?
Fun story. We actually did a video about this where I discussed all the tequila available on every airline.
Nice.
And which one I would choose. And some have margaritas and some don't. And so like a whole content piece on that. I will say, generally speaking, the tequila and margarita availability is not great. And for reasons, it's almost all big brands, which are not particularly fantastic, but I don't typically drink margaritas or tequila on planes. I don't actually drink on planes much anymore anyway. Yeah. But usually if I'm on a plane, I will drink a beer. But I was on, I think it was United the other day, and I had a Patron, which was kind of like, oh, wow, that's okay. That's not the worst. But it is not the place to go for quality agave spirits is in the skies.
Yes, yes. Well, it's the same thing with bourbon, right? It's like, yeah, we got Jack Daniels.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes they will have Woodford Reserve, which is my huge preference, but you have a choice of 2.
Yeah, exactly. And I get it. They got to store them everywhere.
Yes.
Those kind of things. But what's funniest, what happens on flights is when it just happened yesterday. I was coming back from Atlanta and a guy stopped me on the plane like, you're the tequila guy. No, I was wearing a tequila hat, so it made it a little easier to connect it for him. But yeah, it happens all the time. And when my wife's with me, she always laughs. She's like, you should have started doing this 30 years ago.
Well, speaking of Jack Daniels, and I did no research on what your critical reviews that you and Maddie feel, but I happen to have a bottle of Espolón, and I thought we would do a spontaneous teach David how to taste tequila.
Okay.
Is it okay if we try this?
Yes, absolutely. And I actually have a bottle of Espolòn over there, but I don't have any glasses down here in my office. But yes, I can walk you through it.
So first of all, Espolòn, is it basically Maker's Mark of the tequila world? Very common, very pedestrian.
Yeah, it's known to be widely available, very big brand, owned by Campari, I believe.
Okay.
And reasonably priced. Very popular in restaurants and bars as a well, or sort of their workhorse. This is what we use just all the time. Certainly not what we consider to be like a craft tequila.
No.
There are many, many, many worse options.
Okay, good. Well, similar to Maker's Mark then, right? It's nothing special, but there's a lot worse choices you can make.
Precisely.
So I don't have a little fancy bourbon or tequila tasting glass, but I do have a small little kind of cordial glass.
Yep, that's fine. So
do we start with a sniff or no?
Well, a couple things on glasses. Let's talk about that for a second.
Okay.
One, you don't want to use shot glasses unless you're doing shots.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the straight sides typically don't allow the aromas to collect and funnel.
Yeah.
And then also, typically, most people will fill a shot glass to the top because it's only an ounce or so. And then you can't really get any air and they can't get your nose in there. So if you're going to sip tequila, don't use a shot glass. That glass is fine. It's perfectly fine. That'll absolutely work. You don't need ice. It's unlike bourbon in that way, right? So a lot of bourbons are either bottled in bond or they're overproof. And so they're going to put them in a bottle at 50, 57, 59, 61%. Tequila is almost always, not always, but almost always distilled at 40%. Now it's actually distilled at 50 typically, but then they add 10% of water to bring it down. So that Espo is 40% ABV.
Yeah.
If you put ice in there, now you're going to get it down to 35, 32, right? And it's going to taste really watery. So whereas in the bourbon whiskey community, the distillers assume you're going to put a big rock in there and it will slowly dilute and you get it to the point where they want it. In the world of tequila, that water has already been added in the bottle. So you don't need to do that. Now, I'm not going to get mad if you use ice, but you don't need to.
Right.
Third thing is don't put it in the freezer, because anything you put in a freezer is going to mute the aromas and the flavors.
Yeah.
And so if you have really bad tequila, definitely put it in the freezer. But other than that, you don't need to. You can room temperature, like I presume that's room temperature. That's typically the way we do it in tequila is in a glass, room temperature. Fun fact, in Mexico, 80% of all tequila is consumed just as you're holding it.
Wow.
20% in cocktails. In the US, it's the converse. 80% of tequila in the US is consumed in cocktails, margaritas most notably, 20% neat. Also, a fact that you may not believe or know, the US is responsible for 2/3 of the tequila consumption in the world. So far more tequila is consumed in the US than in Mexico where it's made.
How interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, right? So you want to give it a little sniff. And just like in bourbon, you'd kind of give it a little sniff. Now, I will say one thing that I've learned down there that I first thought was ridiculous, but then I've tested it. If you really want to get a good smell of anything, bourbon, tequila, keep your mouth open. So there is a bundle of olfactory sensors in the top of your roof of your mouth that get activated if your mouth is open versus closed.
It's definitely stronger when you open your mouth, for sure.
Right? Yeah, it looks kind of ridiculous, but it definitely makes a difference.
So I'm picking up a little bit of rubbing alcohol, vanilla cookie, sugar cookie, that kind of thing.
Yeah. A lot of that sugar cookie notes is artificial. They put a little chemistry set in there to kind of give it that vanilla sugary flavor. It's very popular now in tequilas that are targeted to a U.S. audience. Unfortunately,
how about that?
So what you want to do, a little sip, kind of give it a swish, like a mouthwash. You really want to coat your whole palate. And obviously that's going to give you more sensation in your cheeks and in the back of your throat. If you just do like a regular sip, you're just going to get it down your tongue. And that's you're really not going to get. Now that first sip is obviously, it's a little bracing, room temperature tequila in the morning. First time I'm like, okay. Like even for me, I'm like, all right, here we go.
It's like drinking cologne.
It's not a great place to evaluate. So it's the second and third sip where you can really kind of give it a little better. In fact, even when we do videos here, we do a warm up. So we'll do like a taste of something just to kind of, get your body and your mouth ready. Like, okay, tequila tasting time.
Yeah. That second sip, definitely smoother.
Big difference.
Definitely smoother.
Yep.
Yeah, a little caramely, I guess maybe to kind of deepen the sugar cookie kind of thing,
Yep.
but just very warming and a little spicy and delicious.
Yeah, and that's a Blanco, obviously, so that doesn't have any contact with oak or with wood.
Right.
A reposado or an añejo would be aged for somewhere between 2 and 12 months.
Yeah.
Which definitely changes the flavor profile considerably. And of course, one of the fastest growing groups of tequila drinkers are people coming over from bourbon and whiskey because tequila makers typically use ex-bourbon and whiskey barrels to age their tequila, and you can get similar flavor profiles. And so a lot of people are kind of trying to, they're kind of over the bourbon hype, and now they're kind of dabbling in the tequila hype, which welcome aboard.
And I think one of your videos mentioned reposado specifically is a really fast growing segment.
Fastest. Yeah, it's actually the fastest growing segment by far. And it's also, for most people, their on ramp to tequila. It's got a little aging, 2 to 12 months by regulations. And so it's a little softer, a little sweeter, a little more cinnamon, butterscotch sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's not as aged as your añejo, extra añejo. They're going to have more of that cognac, maple, bourbon, definitely a colder weather vibe. So reposado is where a lot of people start, and then they either go more age or they go less age to Blanco like you have there.
Yeah. And just again, for the total tequila newbies, reposado means rest. What is the Blanco resting on to make it reposado?
So a Blanco is unaged typically, although it can be aged up to 60 days. It typically is not aged at all. They just distill it and bottle it. Reposado, yes, means rested. It has to be aged for at least 60 days by regulation in some kind of oak. So it can be a larger pipon like they have in France. It can be a regular oak barrel like you would see in a bourbon whiskey distillery or wine cask. But it has to be aged for at least 2 months in some kind of oak. Can't be pine, can't be balsa, can't be Douglas fir. It has to be oak. That's the rule. Now, what you do with that oak and where it comes from and what was in it before, there are literally infinity variables, right? It's an ex-whiskey barrel, it's an ex-cognac barrel, it's an ex-sherry cask, it's an ex-wine casks are really popular now. So what liquid was in that wood before the tequila was in that wood has an impact on the flavor, obviously.
Yes. And then, of course, the third one, añejo, which means old. What are some of the specs there?
So that has to be at least 12 months in oak, but the oak can only be 250 or 300. I have to double check. It has to be a regular cask, right? So you can't put it in a peephole. You can't put it in like a big vessel. It has to be a regular sized cask. So at least 12 months in oak, and a lot of those añejos are 18 months, something like that. Depends on the house style and how old the barrels are. Some people will rechar and use new barrels. Other people will use the same barrels for 20 years, like over and over and over. Very, very different based on the distillery's preferences and the maker's preferences. There's 100 and changes every day, but about 180 distilleries total in the world. So not that many, really.
Amazing.
I was at 25 of them last year.
Wait. We're not just going to listen to this episode. There are downloads, there are resources, there are links, there are bonuses waiting for you on this episode's page when you go over to doitmarketing.com/podcast. That's right, doitmarketing.com/podcast. Grab the notes right under this episode. See you over there.
So I want to talk about original research, kind of just taking back to the B2B side, because you have really embraced this concept of doing original firsthand research for B2B companies, with B2B companies, around customer experience, with customers, I would imagine, about how important it is for them to have a company that responds with speed and responsiveness. Tell us a little bit about your initial adventures into original B2B research and why it is so important to your platform and to your business today.
I mean, I don't know that I have any other way to do it. I mean, I guess because I've been a consultant and a strategist for way longer than I've been an author and a speaker. And like, how else would you write a book or a speech unless you actually knew that what you were saying is true?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, it's like, hey, audience, you should just trust me. And I'm not sure as an audience member, I would buy into that. So I'm like, okay, if I'm going to go up there and I'm going to say, pay me a bunch of money for me to tell you the truth, I think I want to have mathematical validation that actually is the truth.
Yeah.
And so I've, for as long as I've been doing it, always do a lot of first party research on topics to make sure that my assumptions are correct. And actually, I have scuttled projects before, David. I've had books I was going to write, and I did the research. I was like, nope, apparently it's not as true as I thought. We're not going to write that book. And that is an expensive lesson, but I'm happy to learn it. But now we're doing the same thing with tequila. So we do research. We actually have 2 big research studies coming this year on attitudes of the American tequila consumer. So we're doing deep research about that, because there really isn't, there's sales data, but there's not really attitudinal data from drinkers. And so we're going to actually do that on behalf of the industry. So kind of, again, take some from column A and some from column B and cross-pollinate.
Right. Wow. Very, very cool. Tell us a little bit about, I know that your last book was Time to Win, and I think that has now even more so than about 18 months ago that the book came out.
Yep, was proven correct. The assumption that the thesis of the book is proven correct.
It is more and more important for companies to respond quickly, effectively, empathetically. How is that going? Is that still an uphill battle that companies don't really get it, how important it is, or is it starting to catch on?
Yeah, it's starting to catch on. I think because people, all business leaders are consumers first, and they understand in their day-to-day life, like the impact of AI on time horizons and expectations around responsiveness.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and to me, that's going to be the big ramification for AI is what it does to expectations.
Yes.
And so I think business leaders are starting to understand that because they feel it day to day. The problem is they don't know what to do about it. Right. You can't just like walk into a board meeting and be like, oh yeah, get faster. Like there's got to be some kind of like steps and thesis. And so that's what has been really effective over the last, say, year or so, is the framework that's in the book and that we have in the presentation. Like, here's the steps you got to do. Here are the things you can do today. Here's things that take a little longer to actually build a culture of responsiveness in your organization.
Yeah.
What I say now on stage, which I didn't when I first started talking about this, because I don't think people would have believed me, is, hey, before I tell you what I'm going to tell you today, I just want you to know that every single thing I tell you, you're going to do, because your customers will eventually demand it. So it's not a question about whether you're going to do what I tell you to do. The question is going to be what day do you start? So if you start tomorrow, after I leave this stage, you're going to have a 2-year head start on your competition.
Yes.
If you don't, then all bets are off.
Yeah.
And I really believe that to be true. And that definitely gets the audience's attention. I'll tell you that.
Well, I want to circle back as we're landing the plane here. This is about speed. This is about competition. I remember one of your newsletters, maybe even about a year ago or so, you were talking about something tequila related, and one of your friends, I believe this was in the newsletter, you said, and my friend so-and-so, who's a rum influencer, and I think I sent you an email going, rum influencer. What a great job title that is. So let's say that we have this passion, we have this hobby, cheese, video games, old cars, Rolex watches. There are people that are going to be there before us. So you are not the first tequila influencer.
No.
What made you think, or what made you feel that these folks are great? I follow them. I love them. I read their stuff. I have something different, or I have a different slant on this. There is still room for me at the tequila influencer table. A lot of folks might be looking at whatever their hobby, whatever their passion is, and go, oh, there's so many people already out there talking about X, talking about 10-speed bikes. What could I possibly add to the conversation around 10-speed bikes? How would you encourage that person to kind of find their own angle on it, or how should they differentiate if there is other conversations happening in that space?
That's a super good question. Couple things. One, it helps if you don't think of it as a business to begin with, right? Because then you're not pressured into, well, I've got to make sure this works because I got to, buy food.
Right.
So at some level, I didn't give a shit is initially, right? So
lesson numero uno.
Exactly. Don't care about your own success is the first lesson. But then eventually you do care. But even at that, I don't want to be disingenuous about it. I didn't think it was going to be a business, but I also am not in the business of failure either. So couple things. One, There are 40 million Americans per month that have at least one cocktail that contains tequila. That's publicly available data. So that's your total addressable audience, right? So your TAM is 40 million people, okay? So I have 157,000 followers. On average, it's probably 3x that the number of people who actually see content every month. And then you add TikTok. So let's just say 500,000 people a month see my content, right? So I am, even at the level that we're playing right now, a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the total addressable market.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if somebody else is already doing it. They have not cornered the market, right? You know how many watch websites there are out there? YouTube, TikTok, tons. There's always room. Now, you can't be a copycat, right? You have to have something that you're going to bring that they don't currently bring. In our case, Maddie and I's case, it was very intentionally this. So before we started, all of the extant tequila influencers, and in fact, many of those who have come after us, and there's probably 20 that have come since we started, almost all of them are nerds talking to nerds. And that is a model, right? There is a business there. But if you look at the total number of people who drink tequila, 40 million, how many of those 40 million people are aficionados? Well, I have data on that. There is an app called Tequila Matchmaker, owned by friends of ours, and it is the place where you go to rank and review and score your tequilas. Untapped is that for beer, Vivino is that for wine. I presume there's one for bourbon as well, where you kind of log on and say, okay, I was at this bar and I had this one, I give it an 87, whatever.
Yeah.
You're not going to have that app unless you're pretty into it. There are 385,000 members of that app.
Yeah.
Total. Okay. So 40 million people, 400,000 people, right? So the nerd audience is very small indeed. And so one of the ways that we can do 1-minute videos, like we were talking about before, is we're not trying to tell you all the things we know, because our audience isn't that audience. When we work with brands, we say, look, if you want to reach the Tequila 303, Tequila 404, Tequila grad student audience, we're not your partner. That is not our bag. We want to reach the people who are new to it or just getting into it. We dominate that sector of the tequila education market. And that's not an accident, because there's a lot more of those people. And so in any market, even a market that's served, there are sub-markets that you can absolutely conquer. Here's the problem, David. It works the same way with podcasts. I think you and I have had this conversation before. I've started 10 podcasts and I have had infinity people ask me about it. And I always tell them the same thing. If you're going to start a podcast or any episodic content creation endeavor, the only question you need to ask yourself is, whose audience am I taking and how? Because you're not going to grow net new people, right? You're not going to grow podcast listeners. You have to take share of ear from somebody else. And that's because you're either like, oh, I give it to them in a more intermediate level where the people doing it now are more advanced, and that seems intimidating to the listener, so they're going to gravitate towards me, or whatever your own kind of competitive dynamics are.
Right.
But that's how we did it, and that's how everybody should do it, in my estimation.
Yeah, really, really great. So that business model, I just have a nickname. It's the democratizer and the popularizer.
Love it.
Right? It's like, this is, like Apple, right? It's computers for the rest of us. Apple's
never first. They've never been first to market with anything ever.
It's funny, there was an early report when the iPads were new that iPads had like 95% market share. And I think it might have been Walt Mossberg or someone said, Apple has not proven that there is a market for tablets. Apple has proven there's a market for iPads.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
It's like, it's their tablet that sells, nobody else's at that point in time.
Indeed.
Well, Jay Baer, you are an awesome, tremendous human being. Thank you for being with us. Where can people get connected and stay connected to more Jay Baer brilliance? What should we put in the show notes?
Thanks. You can find me at jaybear.com for all things business. You can find me at tequilajaybear.com for tequila shirts, hats, drinking glasses, coasters, advice, and then obviously look for Tequila J Baer on Instagram and TikTok. Happy to help.
Excellent. And hey, long live TikTok. We hope it sticks around.
Yeah, I mean, it is funny the difference between kind of audience tone and tenor and what works on TikTok versus Instagram. We post the same content both places.
Yeah.
But it's really different in terms of like what things go on which platform. And I will say TikTok is a little bit like YouTube in that there's not been too many nights where I went to bed crying about comments, but usually on TikTok. So
if you want to see the downfall of civilization, look no further than TikTok comments.
Yeah. People are not quite as kind there as Instagram, but that's all right.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you, my friend. Thanks again for being with us.
Always a pleasure.
And that wraps up another episode of The Selling Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, tell a friend, go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thesellingshow.com. See you next time.